It's interesting how Winger doesn't just, focus on the warm and fuzzy verses about welcoming the stranger.
Right.
He tackles some of those tougher passages that seem to contradict the idea of just having open borders.
Yeah, like when God instructs the Israelites in Deuteronomy 7 to drive out certain nations.
Exactly. On the surface, it sounds pretty harsh.
Yeah, it almost seems to go against everything we've been talking about.
Right. But Winger digs into the historical context, and he explains that God was protecting Israel from being influenced by the practices of those nations, practices that went directly against his commands.
So it's not meant to be this like blanket statement for all time to just reject anyone who's different.
No, not at all. It's about being discerning, recognizing that different situations sometimes call for different approaches. And it also highlights the need for carefully considered immigration policies.
Right.
Instead of just being completely overwhelmed by a huge influx of people, which could destabilize a nation.
Especially if there are clashing values or ideologies.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating parts of Winger's teaching his concept of what he calls love abuse.
Okay, love abuse. I've never heard that term before. What is that?
It's basically using the idea of love to justify actions that go against biblical teachings.
So you're saying that just because we do something with good intentions or in the name of love, it doesn't automatically mean it's right.
Exactly. Winger points to 1 Corinthians 13.6, where it says that love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth.
Oh, yeah.
So true love shouldn't lead us to endorse things that are clearly wrong or compromise our values, even if it feels uncomfortable.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking that as long as our heart's in the right place, then it doesn't matter what we do.
Right. And that's what he calls love abuse, when we twist the meaning of love to avoid making those tough decisions or to fit our own agenda.
So how does that apply to the immigration debate?
Well, for example, Winner says that advocating for completely open borders, while it might sound compassionate on the surface, could actually lead to chaos and unintended harm to both citizens and immigrants. So sometimes genuine love requires us to set boundaries to make those tough choices and think long term, even if it means going against what feels good right now.
It's like we can't just let our emotions dictate our actions. We have to think about the potential consequences as well.
Exactly. And Winger also emphasizes the importance of upholding the rule of law. Even when it comes to complicated issues like immigration, he cites passages like Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2, which instruct us to submit to governing authorities.
But what about in situations where the law itself seems unjust? Or when we're dealing with the complexities of, undocumented immigrants?
Right. That's where the tension lies. And Winger acknowledges that this can be a very difficult area, especially when we see people being treated unfairly or when laws seem to lack compassion.
So what's the answer? What are we supposed to do in those situations?
He encourages us to find that balance. While respecting the importance of those legal frameworks, he reminds us that we also have a responsibility to advocate for laws that are just and compassionate laws that reflect biblical principles.
So it's not just blind obedience. It's about being active citizens working to create a system that actually upholds justice while also showing mercy.
Exactly. It's about being salt and light in the world, even when we're dealing with controversial issues.
So how does this all play out practically? Does Winger offer any concrete solutions when it comes to immigration policy?
He acknowledges that there are no easy answers or one-size-fits-all solutions. He doesn't offer a specific political program, but he provides a framework for thinking about these issues biblically. Okay.
And engaging in those meaningful discussions.
So it's more about equipping us with the tools we need.
Yes, to analyze the situation and think critically about the different perspectives.
So it's not just about saying do this or don't do that. It's about really wrestling with these issues and seeking God's wisdom.
Exactly. And he stresses that we have to balance compassion for immigrants with the responsibility we have to our nation and our citizens.
Makes sense. We can't ignore the needs of those within our own borders.
Right. He talks about stewardship. Just as we're called to care for our own families and communities, we also have a responsibility to manage our nation's resources wisely. He uses the analogy of a lifeboat.
Oh, wow.
You can't just keep taking on more people than the boat can hold.
Right. Otherwise, everyone's at risk.
Exactly. And Winger also reminds us that we're called to be peacemakers, not dividers.
Yeah. Especially in a world that's so polarized right now.
Exactly. So while we might disagree on specific policies, we should always strive to treat each other with respect and understanding, remembering that we're all on the same team.
That's right. It's about seeking common ground and building bridges even when it's hard.
So it sounds like finding that balance, that sweet spot between compassion and responsibility is key to navigating this whole issue of immigration.
It is. And it all starts with educating ourselves, understanding the biblical perspective, and being willing to engage in those respectful dialogues.
It's about coming to the table with humility and a willingness to learn from each other.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, but we can seek wisdom from Scripture, from wise counsel, and from the experiences of others.
And ultimately, it's about putting our faith into action and showing the love of Christ to everyone involved.
Whether they're immigrants or citizens, whether we agree with them or not. And we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves.